it's extraordinary the extent to which so many fairly mainstream, liberal with a small L, magazines and newspapers that used to have lots of readable stuff in them back in the day, back in the not too distant day, 10, 15 years ago. Magazines like Vanity Fair, employed some really good writers, not the least of which was Christopher Hitchens, who supported, who used his column in part as a platform to make the case for the Iraq War, and was anti-woke before his time. But now you don't see that diversity, that range of views in publications like Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Washington Post, maybe slightly less guilty of this, but pretty much going in the same direction. It's as though they've all been captured by the woke left. It's like the left took this kind of regressive turn. I mean, not everyone on the left kind of went along for the ride, but they've become the kind of dominant voice, and they've cowed the kind of much more reasonable, progressive members of the left. They've cowed them, and and some of them are kind of being forced over to our side. Someone like Andrew Doyle, for instance, the creator of Titania McGrath. I mean, describes himself as a socialist, but is almost kind of he's so unwelcome in the woke church, and he's effectively an apostate. And of course, we know the left hates apostates even more than heretics. So he's kind of been forced to kind of join people like you and I in our kind of along with the other deplorables. But I hope one of the things that the Free Speech Union can achieve is to provide some protection to the more reasonable members of the left from being turned on and ostracised by their woke colleagues. What we see with the way in which gender-critical feminists are being treated. I mean, the extraordinary thing about that is that the trans-Taliban, who make life so difficult for gender-critical feminists like Kathleen Stock, Professor of Philosophy at Sussex University, is on the advisory council of the Free Speech Union. She receives death threats, has things thrown at her. People set off fire alarms when she tries to speak, so she can't be heard. She's a long-standing member of the left, and in the trans-Taliban are allowed to get away with it because the kind of the Politburo within the kind of the woke Kremlin have kind of decreed that if you need to be a good ally of these kind of trans militant advocates, and if you criticise them, if you dissent from their orthodoxy, even in the smallest way, then you're an enemy. And it's we have to try and reduce the power of that Politburo and create more space in our society for people to discuss issues like whether you should be able to self-identify more easily if you think you're transgendered. I mean, that's a really critical issue that affects lots of people. Should we have gender-neutral toilets? Should trans women be allowed into women's changing rooms or women's refuges? Or should they be allowed to transfer from men's prisons to women's prisons? It's all happened because of it's as though we haven't had a chance to have a public conversation about it because everybody's too scared to say what they really think.
It seems to me that the trans issue is sort of maybe a bridge too far. Maybe this is where things are turning. I remember we had Rod Little on he said this. He thought this was going to be, he had a wonderful phrase, he called it peak wank. Basically, this was going to be the ridiculousness of this issue was actually going to be the turning point.
Well, interesting you say that, Peter. I mean, I would love to think that we had reached, peak wank. But every time you think we have, it then gets worse.
They double down.
I thought, people thought Ricky Gervais, he gets away with his opening monologue at the Golden Globes, which was a kind of fantastic, kind of exhilarating, kind of full-throated assault on the kind of censorious high priests of the woke church. Marvellous stuff. You think everyone thought this is a turning point. He's attacked them and he hasn't been cancelled. He's still with us. He'll probably be doing the opening monologue next year if the Hollywood Foreign Press Association give him enough money. But then 2 weeks later, Alistair Stewart tossed to the wolves for one careless tweet. You think that the tide has turned, and then it just starts coming in again. So I think we really need more organisations. I hope the Free Speech Union isn't the only one, but I hope it's a start more organisations like this that can stand up for dissenters, for nonconformists, for mavericks, so they can speak out without risking their livelihoods, say what they think, challenge some of the prevailing orthodoxies which need to be challenged, engage in conversations about important issues that affect so many people without feeling they have to censor what they really think.